My name is Jo Rogers, and today I am joined jointly with Herman Stewart. Herman, thank you so much for inviting me to this conversation, because this is us having a conversation, right? Herman, tell me what your thoughts were when we initially had our conversation. I'll say more about it in a minute, but what were your thoughts? What were you thinking might happen as a result of this conversation that we're about to have?
Well, Dave, thank you for the opportunity for us to have this discussion. I feel it's great. You know, we've got history, we know each other, and we're able to have these kind of conversations without it being misconstrued or seen as anything else. I mean, for myself, it was quite spontaneous, to tell the truth, when we spoke, but there was a lot of life in it, in a sense of, in light of all the kind of difficulties or the racial things that have been coming to light, that have been creating much more awareness and, in a sense, encouraging people to have to pay more attention to themselves and bias or unconscious bias or what their thoughts are and so forth. So I feel it was more around us being able to have an honest conversation, you know, and create a forum that we could share our perspectives and both have the safe space to be able to share our feelings and views and experiences as well. So I feel it was more around creating that space that we could express ourselves and not feel judged or feel that we have to be overly conscious, that we can be honest and be ourselves.
So today, Herman and I spoke, I mean, it would have been a number of weeks ago now. And when we were speaking, we were talking particularly around Black Lives Matter, but it wasn't specifically around that, was it? We were talking about the conversations that were or weren't happening around race in communities. And what I was sharing with you, this was the basis kind of my perspective, was the shame, the disconnection, it's not judgment, it's definitely shame. It wasn't that I felt judged per se, but also the desire to say, I don't want to have to think about that because I've got a view on it. I've got a view, I've got my view, and surely my view is the world view, right? And I was sharing some of that with you and sharing some of my early experiences, late experiences, things that have crafted beliefs and thought processes, discussions that have been had recently. For example, I was saying, well, I think many people would like to think that they're not racist. I'm not a racist. Where does racism fit on the spectrum? That's not me. And then having this idea introduced, I like to think of myself as quite an open person, that actually not speaking up for others is racist. Actually ignoring racism that's going on is racist. I started learning about this idea of racial sobriety and the idea that you can only get over a problem when you admit that it's there. And dealing with that, interestingly, in a vacuum, despite thinking, oh, I can have these conversations with people, I didn't want to have those conversations with people because I didn't want to, actually say, hey, can we talk about race like that? That might not. Number two, they may not want to have that conversation with me. There may be so much more going on for them. And number three, I was so terrified, and even now, and I'm not saying I'm terrified right now, but I'm more hyper aware. I'm hyper aware of not saying the wrong thing, because if I say the wrong thing or infer the wrong thing, then whatever that thing is that we think about is going to happen if I do the wrong thing. So I loved our conversation, and I know this will be an entirely different conversation that we're about to have. But I loved it for that reason, because there was that opportunity to say it and to be aware of it and to acknowledge it, but also the ability for you to be able to share that because of the work you do on how to get past that initial point of conversation. So I guess, based on that, what are your thoughts, Herman?
I mean, you said so many things. You said so many things. I think that there's one thing I want to really put out there quite quickly. Uh, I feel that we all have biases. That's just the reality, and it's just how self-aware we are. You know, how aware are we of the biases that exist? And some biases or some stereotypes can be quite innocent. It's funny. I said recently when I was doing a talk, I showed a picture of Jackie Chan, and for those that don't know Jackie Chan is kung fu expert, and everyone knows who he is. But in the old days of him doing movies, you doing that drunken master and all those kind of things. Like when I was younger, this is like pre-10. I thought that everyone that was Chinese could do kung fu, and that was like that was a stereotype, So we think that every Chinese person that we would see, don't mess with them because they can do kung fu because Jackie Chan could do kung fu, and that is like an innocent kind of stereotype. But I feel that so we all have the capacity of stereotyping, and I think what happens is when we get older and we become much more aware, sometimes our stereotyping can be more negative or can be more detrimental to someone else. It doesn't even have to be like a ethnicity thing. It could be a race thing. It could be a gender thing. It could be an age thing, and we have a view on it that we're not probably sometimes cognizant of, but it's there in the background. And what you were saying earlier about being racist, like where's on the spectrum and am I racist? This, that. I think the problem or the challenge for some people is that it's not even like racism, it's just normal. It's normal
Yeah.
to not see the challenges that others are experiencing. It's normal to not feel the pain because it's not being acknowledged. And it's only when we get to a place of realizing that, like, my situation or my condition or my experience might be so normal to me that I take it for granted and I don't see the other side of it, or I don't see that I am probably thinking a certain way or behaving a certain way that can be conducive with being racist.
Yeah.
But a person may not be explicitly racist in their mind or have explicit racist derogative views, but their behaviors or their attitudes or their thoughts could be in a line with discrimination or unfairly viewing someone in a certain way. So I think it's easy to brand about that word racism, but I feel we need to be more clear that there's prejudice, there's discrimination, there's differences, and I think I think what makes some of these things really detrimental or makes racism really racism is the motive behind the thought, or the motive behind
Intent.
the intent.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel that that's more like what I would say, thinking
Right.
about some of these things.
Intent. But you've got unintentional intent and you've got intentional intent. And for example, a woman pressing down the button when she's in a car park, she's on her own, a black man walks past, shuts. Was it intentional, or was it that may even just be subconscious. She may not even realize she is doing that thing, But ultimately, that is a stack because it's based on that individual. And it's bringing what you talked about, intention and the subconscious, right? It's bringing an awareness, bringing that to the forefront to actually be able to say, oh, it was back here, but now I can bring it to the forefront. I'm able to go, oh, let me look at that. And what I say triggered such an annoying word, but when I hear things and people say, oh, you know that you're that way, or you may be, they talk about kind of white fragility, you know, that's the thing that comes up for me, which is, oh God, that's not my intention. My intention is not that. I want good intent for people. Hopefully I'm a person of humanity and was raised in a different way, but I do understand that despite my good intentions can also create bad results. So that comes down to me really looking and being aware and being open to the idea. Because I think I was sharing with you earlier, the way that I'm seeing the world at the moment, it's probably not this true, but it's this kind of, one side is saying, well, we've always got the two sides, haven't we? We've got this basis of people in the middle who there's no intention, but they're kind of working with it in a system that may be discriminatory, that may be biased, but that no one's really thinking about it because it's in the subconscious is not saying, hey, this is actually a problem. And then you've got two sides of the structure saying, you know what, everybody's racist and the whole system is racist. And if you are not speaking out about racism, then you yourself are racist. And then you've got the other side saying, look, we're not racist. We've never been racist. Nothing is racist. Sure, those aren't the only two extremes here, right? You've also got the intense people who genuinely, I like to think it's fewer than in the past, but that you do have people who are out and out racist. But we're not really talking about those people at the moment. We're talking about that kind of middle section of society that I like to think, I think have best intentions and genuinely believe that we're kind of all one and that everybody's equal. So it's hard when we believe, oh no, I'm doing everything I possibly can. Hard is probably too strong a word, but like to hear them, hey, what you're doing may not be enough. You may not actually be taking enough action. You may not actually be recognizing people's difficulties. I think I shared a few examples with you that, I'm from Bristol, and my view of Bristol from the perspective of, I will put myself in kind of white middle class Bristol, close to the center. Nobody that I know, in fact, everybody that I know in Bristol would be horrified if they were labeled a racist, horrified. And that doesn't mean to say that they're not, but they would be distressed. That was one of the things that I was brought up, everybody's equal, you treat everybody equal. It would not, horrified. However, I've got many friends who grew up in Bristol, usually Black, Asian as well, but mostly Black friends who grew up in Bristol, who I've never talked to them about race. And now we've been friends for, I'm going to say 30 years, 25 years, and we've never spoken about race. And I've always made the assumption that their view of Bristol was the same as my view of Bristol. And only as a result of Black Lives Matter did I even broach the conversation, because I didn't want to have, because the same thing, I didn't really want to have that conversation, but because I thought maybe by having the conversation, I might find out something that I didn't want to know. That would truthfully, when I get aware about it, when I really think about it, and that's what I didn't want to ask the question of, and I'm talking good friends for numbers of years, and we've never had a conversation about race. And the answer I got was, look, we just move differently through the world. I talk about this every day with my sisters. I don't necessarily talk about it with you. That's a big thing to hear. So these are the things that made me go, oh, wait, this is, I know it's stupid. It sounds so naive. Like, this is really a thing for people. Like, sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Because I should know that this is something. This is not a new, but in my mind, because I'm in this group of non-intentional people who are not intending to be racist, therefore that discounts or that's everybody's reality. I think is the phrase I would use. Not discounts anything. I would stand at 100%. It's that it's just not in my reality. It was not in my, and we're not talking 6 years ago or 25 years ago. We're talking this summer. I had that conversation. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I think, like, to chip in there, I think it goes back to like what I was saying earlier, around it's normal, and I think that's what can be the challenge. Because if you think about it, and I wouldn't say it's anybody's fault in that sense. If you're brought up like you have no choice of your ethnicity, you have no choice of your gender, you have no choice. You're born a certain way. Do you know what I mean? And if you grow up in a certain locality, a certain environment, a certain family, you always see a certain representation of people, and you're always going about life and doing it in a normal way. The fact that you may have greater opportunities or advantages might not even be seen because it's just normal.
Yeah.
It's like this is normal. It's like this. I've gone to school, and like the teachers look like me, the students look like me. I've gone to work, my colleagues look like me. It's like the normality of it can be what blinds people from the reality that's wider than their circumstance. And I feel unless you have people that you're having real conversations with, um, because the reality of it is, even those people that, like you said, are your friends, and you've been friends for lots of years, and you've never spoken about race, because the reality of it is you've got lots of things in common that probably that was the center of what your relationship's about, whether you're studying together, or you're clubbing, or you're doing sport, or you're socializing, or you're doing whatever. So your conversations have got content.
Yeah.
So it's about how deep do you get beyond that content, because it is about there is a great possibility of discomfort. There's a great possibility of awkwardness when one starts speaking about their experience, and it's very uncomfortable. And I feel, for me, what's been helpful in the sense of me being able to have these conversations, with my friends and people that I'm close to, and that are not from the same ethnicity as me, is because I have done a lot of this self work. I've had to look at myself. I've had to look at, like, I've had to overcome some of the real hard feelings that I've had about the unfairness, because I'm looking at the world and I'm seeing it through a lens where I am seeing the discrimination. When I'm knowing about apartheid, I'm seeing that it's people that look like me that are being treated badly. I'm seeing, these kind of circumstances, and I'm seeing someone that kind of looks similar to me, and then it's making me have to have a conversation with myself, or how do I feel about that? And a lot of times, for many years, it was anger, or it was upset, or it was sad, or it was it's not fair. And then it got to a point of, it's like it's normal. Like, it's how can this not be seen? How can people be seeing this happen, and like they're not in big trouble? How can things be happening where police are doing things, or different people are doing things, and it's like they don't go to jail? Like it's almost like that can really turn your heart in a bad way.
Yeah.
And for myself, I had to really do some work through that, in a sense of knowing that those feelings, or being upset, or being angry, I was seeing that I was able to carry that. I was seeing that was having to have an impact on me first. For me to keep that alive, for me to think the world's unfair or people are unfair, or that I am having to keep that alive, and that means my everyday experience is I'm having to experience that as a part of my life. And I think a lot of people are doing that, and they're going through that experience, and it's difficult and challenging. And one of the things that really helped me, because for me it's been a lot of introspection and a lot of reflection, is when I really discovered for myself that I'm a personality before an ethnicity. You
Mm,
know, when I was born, I didn't know my ethnicity, but I was a person.
mm,
And I just reconnected with that truth that I am a person. And then I started to see that I'm me, and I've got relationships with a lot of different people, and we have really good relationships that are deep, that are heart connected relationships where we resonate because I'm a personality and I'm me, and there then, and race is secondary to that in those circumstances, but it takes being willing to have those conversations first, probably with yourself,
right.
and then if you can have it with others, but being willing to let yourself experience the challenge that others are experiencing.
It's interesting because there's two things that you talked about, and they're at the opposite end of the spectrum in my mind. Like, one is the anger and processing that anger and resentment. And just from a personal perspective, because I can't talk about it relating to race. Ah, Mary, well done. There's me talking away. So the two things I was thinking about relating to what you've just said. One is at the different end of the spectrum. So it is the anger, and it's the expression of anger, the allowing of others' anger, the the allowing people to express anger to me, and when I have experienced anger, and this is obviously not relating necessarily to race, but what I saw in that ability, well, the need and the desire to express that anger in a safe way and in a safe space, which is what we were talking about. I guess before this call, we were saying, it's like that safe space, that ability to be able to say, I feel angry about this, and to express it to somebody. I mean, I've had an interesting experience over the last few months where anger has come up a lot. And unless you can express it to somebody that is able to hear it and able to help you process it, or able to sit with that anger, it becomes a real problem. Technical issues. That's a problem. Shall we? I wonder if this is recording. So shall we stop? All right, I'm going to restart the recording. So technical issues, but
Yeah.
where I was going was about the anger,
Okay.
and the anger and the kind of the higher purpose. Like, the anger is, I need to be able to sit with people that can sit with my anger. I need to be able to express that anger in a healthy way. I need to be able to say, this is not okay. And for people not to think that I need them to fix it, which I don't know whether that links into what you were sharing, but that's been my acknowledgement of my own anger over the last few months. I think we're human beings. Anger is like a base level emotion, and to the harmful stuff is holding it in, is keeping it in, is not being able to express it, not being able to share it, not being able to unravel that. And I'm also interested because it's what you were saying is, my personality first and foremost. Yes, absolutely. And then people say, well, you know what, I don't see race, I'm a person. But actually the truth is, two truths can exist at the same time.
Mhm.
And this is the hard thing. It's like, what people say when they say they mean they mean I don't see race. Well, what I would think I mean when I would say that, I would mean I don't want to judge anybody on their race, and I don't. I'm also expressing the idea that I do not want to be kind of deemed to be intentionally racist. That's what I would mean when I say things like that. And I know many people have said this is not right. You know, that's not a phrase that is helpful, and I can acknowledge that. On the other side, you've got people who I would say would feel angry about being put in that environment. It doesn't bother me so much, but people that I've spoken to of all ethnicities, by the way, that they would be labeled as, but be being put into the racist bucket. Like that's an anger. So there ends up being anger on both sides when actually what needs to be done, or what I hear is, do you know what? There is unfairness and there is unjust, and like the world is unfair and it is unjust. And it's likely that race, not likely, it is true that race is implicated, and in many different ways. And if we had an entirely fair economy here in England or in the UK, we would be seeing things of injustice elsewhere in the world. So, you know, even if we had our stuff together here in this country, there are other things that we would be watching that would actually make it unjust here in our country regardless. So there's anger both sides. And the truth is, what I hear you saying is, I had to express it. I had to express the anger. I had to be able to share that anger. It had to be channeled in a way, but also from my perspective, what I'm able to see is I have to be able to express that in a positive way. It's not even positive, sorry. I can express my anger in whatever way I want, but the people to whom I express it to, that will be whether it's a healing experience of anger or whether it's a detrimental experience of anger. So me being able to say to you, hey, you know, something makes me angry, I'm able to say that to you, and you're able to not take it on as I'm being angry at you specifically, that I need you to hear me because I'm angry. And that's my experience around anger, which I think relates to this situation. Well, I don't know if it relates to this situation, because what's interesting is I don't necessarily have anger around race until I see experiences like I see in the US. I felt anger at that moment. I also felt deep shame at not realizing. I felt embarrassment. You know, we're talking about George Floyd particularly. I felt anger. I felt humiliation and shame. And also, you know, not wanting to be a part of that. That's not me. That, you know, I'm on this side. And actually, the truth was anger. Anger is a big part of this conversation, I guess.
I feel this is so layered. And I think it's easy to simplify or generalize. And it would be good for us, even in our humanity, to understand that even if someone does something, they don't necessarily have to represent a race. You know, I don't expect that everything every black person does represents me.
No,
I think the big issue is when there is a system or there is a normality that justifies that or doesn't punish that appropriately, as though it would be punished if other races were doing the same things. And I think that it kind of goes back to what you were saying in the conversation about that woman that's in her car and she puts down a door. I think that locks her door. I think that, you know, in some places and in some situations that will be wisdom, you know. And
true. Yeah.
And to tell the truth, that's something that I do at times when I'm in the wrong place or wrong. You know, anything can happen at any time. We're vulnerable. But what would be a good real sense check is if the same scenario there was a different person from a different ethnicity and they never done it.
Yeah.
That's when you start seeing that, okay, there is a difference of behavior now. And I think that that's what we need to be more aware of, which is something that some of it's an inside job, to tell the truth. and it's
Isn't
about
it
how
all an
honest we
inside
can
job?
be. So some of it, in a sense of some of it is like we need to be honest about how we feel about certain things, but a lot of people just don't do the work.
Yeah.
They don't do the self work. They don't do the looking at themselves in that way, because a lot of times we're going to look at ourselves and see things that we don't like.
Yeah.
We're going to see, I'm kind of, yeah, I'm prejudiced about that, or I'm prejudiced about this. I've got views that I wouldn't share proudly to people.
Mm.
And sometimes there's nothing wrong with that. I wouldn't say there's nothing wrong with those views. The reason I'm saying there's nothing wrong with it, I'm coming from a place of saying you don't have to always agree with your thoughts. And sometimes your thoughts come from your environment, and if you was brought up in a certain way and you had a family that had certain views and they expressed that openly in the home, and you automatically thought that could be like your dad's view or your sister's view or whatever. It's about when we see it again, how do we approach it now?
Mm.
Like, how do I look at this thought now? Like, okay, it's there. Wow, it's even one that has probably been default for me. But my gosh, I don't like that. You know what I mean? And it's about how do we be that honest to say, I don't like that about me.
Yeah.
I don't like, did I think like that? Did I think, and I think that until we're able to be that honest, we may be more in denial.
Oof. And that's so true. So true. That is a statement. Until we're able to be that honest, we're going to be more in denial, because I think let me share on that. I want to share on that specific piece. 1999, I go to New York. I'm with a group of guys. We're talking race. I don't know how I get into this conversation about race, but we're talking about race wars and what's to come. And there's going to be these race wars. Guys from New York. I mean, it was a deep conversation, so it wasn't only about race. But what was interesting to me, I'm 18, 19 years old at the time, and the level of hostility towards what was clearly, when in hindsight, their experience was interesting. Because the level of denial, when people are telling you a truth, and I am taking that truth on as a dig at me, they weren't, let me tell you, they weren't ever saying anything about me per se, but because I was labeling myself within the group that they're talking about, I'm saying, well, that's not true. Or that might be in the States, but that's not here. That's this is my experience. I can't talk as an experience as a Black woman, because I am not a Black woman, so how I could even have an expression of that was to me, and we live and we do the best we can with the information that we know. And of course, those conversations have allowed me to grow. So in not having conversations with some people, I've had conversations with others, and they've always stayed in my mind. I then talk even more recently about my partner, who talks about racism on a regular basis, saying, this racism is there, and how much I continue to gaslight this man who I, know, love, and trust, and say, it's not all about race, it's not all about race. Not everything you're experiencing. You can be an awkward person. Maybe it's you, which is denial, right? It's denial of someone else's reality. And right as I may be, I love being right, but I may be right that it's not all about race, and that he can be an awkward individual. That might be true, but it's a denial of someone else's truth that is actually most harmful, I'm learning. Because just even having these conversations and hearing, wow, I'm angry, I've been angry. And I wanted to ask you two questions in addition to share whatever you feel on that piece. How did you process that anger? And where are you now? What are your thoughts now around? I know it's a big question, so it may be for another part too.
I mean, some of it is around my own personal faith. and knowing that unforgiveness and having, carrying certain things is just unhealthy.
Mm,
You know, I heard an analogy before, which is powerful, saying that unforgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die.
right.
I know it can be that's quite graphic, but it's that reality that a lot of times for you to be angry and like vengeful and upset is really having more of an impact on you every day than those you're probably angry at, because they probably don't even know. And you're experiencing the volatility of those feelings, and you have to give it energy every day to keep it alive. So if you're angry or upset or unforgiving for 20 years, that's 20 years of energy that's being deployed in a way that is self-destructive,
Mm,
and it's impacting the quality of your own life. So for me, I a part of it was that, but a part of it as well was me going beyond my own ignorance, like recognizing that every person isn't racist,
mm,
knowing that there's great people in every culture, and because of having relationships with different people, that helped me to, you know, develop my view, to mature in my thinking,
mm,
and to be able to see that I've got some people and around me, and their love towards me or their kindness or what they're doing for me has got no bounds, and they're not from the same ethnicity as me, so then starting to see that truth and seeing that some people from my ethnicity have just been like negative towards me, and that's why I think it's so complex and it's so simple, but it's like we can't broad brush anything, because there's people from all different backgrounds that there's always outliers, there's always exceptions, there's always, but for me, it's been about me recognizing that it's about relationships,
mm,
and sometimes people can't help what they're experiencing, or they can't help the beliefs that they've got at present because they've been developed from they've been a child, or they've been developed because of a very narrow narrative. And sometimes it's not necessarily their fault. It's like, if you don't know any better, you're not going to do any better. But if you can know better, you can be aware that there is better, and
mm,
I feel it's desire. If you desire to do better, that is a great start, so even if you did have contrary thoughts that go against your values, that discriminate others, or you look at others in a certain way that's demeaning, and it's based on your normality, or based on this is how you've always thought, or this is how what you've been taught. If you're willing now to change that, that's great, because
mm,
that's just your truth. Like, now you're taking ownership
mm,
of how you view or how you feel or how you see. And that's why I really try and judge people on their own merits, and I really try not to judge, because I don't really know enough information. Even if someone's being unkind to me, I don't necessarily know why they're being unkind. I don't know what kind of day they've had. I don't know what kind of life they've had. So I think it's more difficult to not have a judgment, because
mm,
sometimes it's like you're saying, everything isn't race. It's everything isn't. So you could be being treated badly because you're not being a nice person, or you could be treated badly because that person's had a bad day. you
yeah,
know it could be any reason. It's what makes it become race is what is the belief behind it.
yeah,
And that's where it goes deep, because you are not necessarily going to know someone's belief or why do they behave like that unless they're willing to be honest, they're willing to be vulnerable, and they're willing to share it with you. You're not going to know. So I think sometimes we can too quickly call it race, but I think there are some situations that we can be honest about to say, like even like in recruitment, or the roles in society that people, you can see definitely there's a race implication there. And even if it's not um race exactly at the top, it's probably race in the pipeline, to say you're not even getting the opportunities to
Yeah.
develop the skills that would help you to acclimatize to be at the top.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
The
just,
problem may have started here, even though the results are up here. It's like,
yeah,
based on results, something must be happening in the system if it's not proportionate to the number of people, to the population.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it could be starting even before that. It could be starting before the workplace. It could be starting education. It could be starting.
Earlier than that, yeah.
It's because it's really insidious. It's insidious. Really. But I feel if we can be honest about these conversations, like we're talking now, it's not it's not aimed at you. It's just wouldn't be aimed at you, because you're talking to me and we're having a conversation. And the reality of it is, you're not accountable for all those things. You don't have the influence or the power or the authority or the meddling to have done all these things. So it's clear that something or someone's done it, or but I
Well,
feel we got to have the conversations.
those are the two truths. So I believe that there are two truths that are simultaneously here. One is that I'm paraphrasing and I'm thinking off the top of my head, that race is not the only conversation, and yet race is a very important conversation. Not all white people are racist, and yet a conversation with all people about race and their ideas and our ideas about racism is very important. And it is and essential, I would say. There's it's not all about race. It may be other things. Is simultaneously true with, don't gaslight people because your experience is not about race. Those are two truths at the same time. And it's the maturity, the wisdom, as you say, is in understanding that both those truths can be true. I can have a conversation about race and still be nationalistic in my thinking, that hey, we're coming together as a nation, like that. It's not one or the other. I can be proud of who I am without being rejecting of others. Like these are they are simultaneously true, so it's everything we've been talking about. That's the piece I wanted to talk about after the anger. And this may be for the next conversation, because for me, what I've heard in this conversation is it's all about going inside individuals. Like we have to each take full responsibility for ourselves. And that's another truth, right? We have to take responsibility for ourselves. And at the same time, we also need to be aware of the bigger picture. I cannot hold you responsible as a Black man for everything that has happened to Black man, and you can't hold me responsible for everything that's happened to the white race. But we are a representation of who we are at the same time. Like those two truths remain true. I'm not responsible for my ancestors, yet I am responsible for what I choose to do as a result of what has happened, and et cetera, et cetera. It's balancing those truths. I heard you say before that this is not a logical conversation. This is emotion. This is an emotional conversation. This is about anger and hurt, and it's about love and justice and truth and freedom, and those values that to me take us to a higher level, which kind of brings me on to I'd love to talk to you again if you're open to it, and talking about that higher level to solving these issues, because you and I can have conversations one-on-one, but it doesn't necessarily, and it's important to have a conversation one-on-one, and equally we're not responsible for solving the whole thing. we're not going to solve this. But we can be a part of that, as I hear.
And I feel it's really important that, I mean, we're not here trying to fix it.
No.
I feel it's about how do we have honest discussions and dialogue that really help to help. It helps people to progress in their thinking and understanding. I think understanding is what's lacking. And a lot of times, if you don't understand this, it's difficult for you to share your view, or it's difficult to empathize because you're sharing it in a limited perspective. And I feel if we can be mature enough, and I don't think maturity's got to do with age. I think maturity in a big sense has got to do with exposure and how one has processed it, because not every lived experience is the same. And you know, it's like you could have lived experience and, you know, you're unforgiving and angry and bitter about it, and you can have a lived experience and you've come to terms with it, you've accepted it, you're not naive to it, you're not gullible, but you understand, you know. And there's two different lived experiences, and I don't think that we could just limit lived experience to an ethnicity.
Yeah.
Because different people within an ethnicity still have different experiences. But I feel that people getting more insight, I feel insight's important. And that's why, you know, because we've got a relationship, we've got a friendship, we can have these conversations. And now we're having this conversation, it's recorded and people can see it or hear it. But not everyone has got these kind of relationships that they can go across the border, if we're going to talk about it in that way. If we go across the border to a different lived experience that's a cultural, from a cultural perspective, to really get a insight. It's like you're limited in how you can even see it. And it's like, I think about it like this. If we wanted to say that we're a group of men, if we wanted to solve a situation or solve an injustice or change a policy or whatever that's got to do with women, we would be very limited and very naive and very ignorant if we think that we could be in a room by ourselves and solve it without having the input of women.
Yeah.
You know, it's that reality, because like the woman's got the lived experience, and not only that, the woman's got a different perspective and a different viewpoint of how it could be remedied.
Yeah.
So I feel that if we don't have conversations that we have a variety of ethnicities in the conversation, and it can be productive and constructive, it's difficult to come to an understanding.
Yeah, agreed. And therefore we segregate and we stay in our little bubbles, as is easy to do, stay in our little bubbles, because it's simpler to do it that way. And our lived experience remains limited. I love having these conversations with you, Herman. And I am very aware that, yeah, I am definitely not hopefully I am more of a spokesperson for how not to do it, or my thinking. What I am willing to do is I'm willing to share my thinking around it and my mistakes. And I'm willing to say I have not been a part of the solution. That's what I'm for sure able to say. And I think that's where a lot of my shame had come from, which was, hey, I did not appreciate that people that I love were being hurt by my denial of a situation. And that in itself, for me to be able to say that and say, okay, I can change that by maybe sharing my thoughts around that and having conversations about that, for no other reason than to just make amends in my own way. Like, that's me being able to say, hey, this was my thought process, and I'm able to shift this, because that's where it works. It's in our own, and my reluctance to shift that thought process for some reason. And I think hopefully that gives us all a little bit of a sense of where we are. how shall we
Yeah.
shall we close up now, or
Yeah, we can.
and focus on I would love to have another conversation with you on this topic around maybe even the solution here, and not solution, but just discussions of different things, different thoughts
of what could be helpful.
What might be helpful.
Yeah.
Good.
Cool.
Let's do that soon. We'll do that very soon. We'll put a date in the diary for that one. Okay. Thank you for everybody that's watched. Herman, do you want to say anything to people that have been watching?
Just want to say, don't be hard on yourself. I mean, you spoke about it, Joe, about, that's where the shame came in. I think we need to address things and separate from shame, because shame doesn't always create good results. And just, know it's a step at a time, a conversation at a time. And hopefully that they've got something from it that's helped them to have greater insight concerning what we're talking about.
Amazing. Thank you, Herman. Thank you, everyone that's watched. I hope you've gained something as well. We were talking about being a fly on the wall when people have a conversation, and there's no better person for me to have a conversation with somebody as wise as you, Herman, especially with your beliefs and your backgrounds and the work that you do in the mentoring. I'm excited for our next conversation to see where that takes us. And otherwise, thank you all for watching.
Take care.